Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday night patrons-only planning stream for the Eventide campaign. Hi there, I am Jason Bullman. I'm the creator of Eventide and a few other things you might have. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to chat about the adventure. That's been our focus now for quite a bit, and it's going to continue being our focus for a bit. I'm using this adventure to do world building and to help flesh out some of the campaign narratives at the same time. So, all in all, it's a fruitful process, but it does feel like it's going slow. But that said, we are making progress. And with that, we're about to wrap up part 1 of Wolfren's Fate. It's a 4-part adventure. I think the second part is probably one of the shorter pieces, but that said, there's still some meat on these bones we got to explore. But as my playtest groups are wrapping up part 1, it's time to really start digging into the design on part 2, and I wanted to kind of go through some of my thoughts on where it's at and where I think it's going to go. Right now, it's still kind of a little early days, despite the fact that, frankly, the first piece of it runs in, about 3 weeks. That's a little scary because I haven't written a lot of it yet. But it is coming together. So what I want to do here tonight is talk about where the story stands in part 2, what the beats are, and kind of where I'm going with this. Is going to be a little bit of a free-form brainstorm on my part. And as I talk, I often find that sometimes as I talk and describe things, my brain will spit out bits and pieces that I find useful. So you'll have to excuse me if I stop to write down some notes as I talk. But we'll see how it goes. All right. So, part 2. All right, so what happens in part 1? Part 1 is fundamentally all about getting to the point in the bottom of Wolfren's Tower where there is a barrier blocking the way, and that barrier can only be removed by someone who has Wolfren's signet ring. So the entire bit of the first adventure is realizing that there is not necessarily an end, but there's a block preventing them from getting to inside the vault, Wolfren's vault, where all of his treasures, and in fact, Wolfren himself, are waiting. So part 2 is, part 1 is that comes to a close, because there's nothing more they can do there without that signet ring. So part 2 is trying to find the signet ring. And ultimately, part 2 and part 3 kind of share the same goal, because part 3 is actually going to go get the signet ring. But part 2 is figuring out where the signet ring even is. Because frankly, Wolfren disappeared 300 years ago, and there are very few people even alive who were around then, and most of them are now quite up there in years, and they're mostly elves. So the challenge here is that the players have to track down an object from antiquity. It'd be like going to any of us nowadays and being like, yeah, go find me a ring from before the, Revolutionary War, of one individual, right? Of George Washington's father. Go find his signet ring. Just go find that. And it's in this city, but you don't know where. Or maybe it's not even in this city. So, that, in and of itself is a big challenge. Right? So that's what part 2 is. Part 2 is trying to track down this ring. So when they emerge from the tower, they're officially kind of starting part 2, and part 2 is going to go at their own pace. The party can do other things during this. They can, frankly, I can start weaving in some interpersonal narratives. I can start pulling things from their backstory. There's a whole bunch of things that can happen in part 2. But what I want to talk about here today is that part 2 has kind of a puzzle, an urban puzzle hunt that they need to solve. And I've got the main beats of the puzzle, and then I've got added things to add meat to this to prevent it from, frankly, just being a 4-hour role-playing excursion and then it's over, right? So their first, most likely exploration is to go to Wolfren's Last. Now, Wolfren's Last is directly across the square from the tower. It's obvious. This is the place that is the museum dedicated to Wolfren and Wolfren's Tower. So, I of all of the places they could go, because this is designed to be kind of an open exploration, they can go and talk to whoever they want. But I want to give them a laundry list of places that they could go check out to kind of get them moving, to get them exploring stuff. Now, the trick to these is that some of them contain useful information, others don't. Some don't at first, but then might later if you ask the right questions. So the order that they go to things may be important, but of all of the things, I think the one thing I can be sure of is that they go to the Wolfren Museum. Because you're looking for an object that belonged to Wolfren. Where would it be? Let's go check the museum. Now, obviously, some groups might have a ring that they got from the tower, but it's not a signet ring, so that's not it. So, if they go to Wolfren's museum, they're going to get a chance to chat and get to know Hadrim a bit better. Hadrim is a character they've been introduced to already because Hadrim was the one kind of pricing the items that they had when they came out of the tower after the end of the kind of first half. And Hadrim knows a lot about Wolfren and runs the museum, but he does not, obviously, have a signet ring in his collection, right? He just doesn't have it. He'd love to have it, but he doesn't have it. It's not something that it's in there. But he does and can. He is my key NPC right here at the beginning. He's the locus of the adventure. He does provide the list of places where they might go to ask about it, right? So that's the key here, is that he's the knowledgeable one because he knows a lot about Wolfren. That he may know places that might know more, right? It's not like anyone's ever come to him before and said, hey, do you know where I can get a signet ring from Wolfren, right? That's not a thing that he's been asked for before. But if you ask him, hey, is there a way I could find this thing? They might be able to, he might be able to point you in the right direction. So this is where the adventure really gets started. And I have a list of a handful of places, and a few of these are just outright red herrings. And I may want to add a few more. So let me walk through some of the red herrings first. So he may suggest that they go check with House Trevere. Now, House Trevere is one of the noble houses in town, and one of the most powerful ones. They're the head of their noble house sits on the council in the noble seat. And they got a complex story about them trying to dominate the lumber trade in town and stuff. But he's also known for collecting relics from the town's past as like a hobby. But that said, when they arrive there, they quickly come to realize that he's never had too much of a fascination with Wolfren. So I think the point of this lead is just to be like, Hadrim knows that the House Trevere collects old things. And in fact, has probably sold some old things to them. But he never has had or had to deal with them in auction for various things. But as it turns out, House Trevere doesn't have anything of Wolfren's. Mostly what they have is old deeds, contracts, and other things concerning logging and the history of the town. Now, there's a purpose for some of these red herrings as well. And the purpose here is to also kind of introduce this character more, even though it's unrelated, right? So it still serves a purpose for me as a storyteller, because it introduces a very pivotal character in the town, but one who is not at all pivotal to the story they're coming. So, useful, but ultimately red herring. So I think that one's open and shut. I think another place he might suggest that they go investigate is a place called the Remembering Stone. And this is something that isn't in any of the documentation that you folks have. There is, outside of town, there is an old shrine, an old marker that denotes the names of elves who died in the town. It's kind of how they remember their kin, because they don't bury, right? So instead they create remembering stones. The elves don't bury their kin in Eventide. It's not their cultural tradition. So as a result, there's this remembering stone that has the names of stuff. And according to Hadrum, Wolfren used to visit it with some frequency. And the caretakers there may be old enough to remember him. And in fact, that is true. They are old enough to remember him. They do know him, or rather they did. But there's nothing here about the ring. I see some questions in the chat, by the way. Save those for the end. We will probably have time to chat with them. Just make sure to remember them, because I won't. But I do think that they may be the ones to say that this isn't the only place he used to remember. So Wolfren used to visit this place. It gives some context to Wolfren as, again, being interested in the elves and the folks who lived here before the humans and goblins and other folks came to move here. And frankly, the reason behind the scenes is because the elves were the ones who were here when Eventide happened, and that was an area that Wolfren was studying. So that's why he was interested in the elves. That's why he visited here. I think that this is only partially a red herring, because I think they also know that he used to visit the people at the Remembering Stone, and I'm saying this right now because I just came up with it, that the people at the Remembering Stone also know that Wolfren used to visit the Skygaze Inn. I was going to have Hadrum drop that, but I think it's more interesting if the folks from the Remembering Stone drop that. So I'm gonna put a little note in here. Okay, so like I said, you'll have to bear with me. I'm kind of brainstorming on the fly here. So, they are the ones, the people at the Remembering Stone. They don't remember anything about a ring. They have no knowledge of a ring. However, they do know that he used to go to the Skygaze Inn very frequently, and sometimes would even stay there. He has his own tower, but sometimes he would go to the Skygaze Inn, and because his work would take him there, and he would stay throughout the night, he would sometimes rent a room and stay there. So, those are the two red herrings. I think there are some places that I currently have brainstormed anyway. I may add more. But those are the two red herrings. Because some of the purpose of this, right, is to take them around town and let them see things. So, I might do some of this to also contextualize Wolfren, right? So, he goes to the Remembering Stone to pay tribute to elves that he never met, that he doesn't know, but he still went and paid his respects. He would go to the Skygaze Inn. Why? Well, the Skygaze Inn is a really peculiar place. It's an old elven celestial observatory in the middle of town that has been converted to an inn. And the eyepiece of the large ancient telescope comes down over the head table in the inn that you can rent. So you can rent the high table and be able to view celestial events as they occur. So, on special nights when there's supposedly, celestial events of various sorts, the Skygaze Inn has parties, and folks, you can get invited, and everybody gets a turn to look up at the stars and stuff. It's kind of a cute little place, but it is an expensive inn. It's an inn for those with some coin. It's not a cheap place, because as it turns out, maintaining an ancient crystal telescope is really expensive. So Wolfren used to go there because he was studying celestial events as well. That was part of his research. Also into Eventide, because the star charts from the ancient past, the players don't know this yet, but they will learn it when they visit the Skygaze Inn, is that the star charts from the ancient past are different than they are now. There are fewer constellations in the sky. So there's that element of the story. So they can visit the Skygaze Inn. Now, Skygaze Inn knows that that Wolfren stayed there a lot and sometimes left some things there. And in fact, when he disappeared, he had stayed there only a few days before and left a whole box of things in his room because he was going to come back a few nights later and stay some more. This wasn't infrequent, or this wasn't uncommon, but this is the place where they learn that Wolfren left things at the Skygaze Inn. But they don't have them anymore. In fact, they don't know what happened to them. And this gets me to one of my first side adventures, but I'll get to that in a second. The point here is that they had a ring, and the ring is gone. Well, they don't know that they had a ring, but they had a bunch of his possessions, and in fact, they did have a ring. They just don't know. However, one of their old servers, who is now retired, who is an elf, is still alive. And she knows that there was a ring in there and knows who picked it up. She knows that Wolfren's brother picked up his belongings several years after he died or went missing. So, that's what you can learn at the Skygaze Inn. But they don't know where the brother is. They don't know anything about him, right? So the other places that they might think to go to, and this falls in the realm of places that Hadram would have pointed them to. Hadram would have pointed them to the Teetering Tower and possibly the House of Order. Now, the House of Order I may leave out of this. I may put in it. I'm not sure. I think the House of Order stays in it, but it may not be something that Hadram mentions. It does make sense for him to mention it, though. So that's maybe why it stays in this part. I may introduce it later instead. I'm still trying to figure out the kind of web of connectivity here. So he recommends going to the Teetering Tower because it's a really old bookstore that also is filled with oddities and rarities. And a lot of them are very old. So Hadram might be like, well, you can always go check there. I doubt it. But, you know, it is a really old store that has things from that era. So it's worth checking out. So they can go to the Teetering Tower. And if they go to the Teetering Tower, the owner is like, yeah, I don't have Hadram's signet ring. So that seems like a dead end. But it's not. And there's a reason for that, and I'll get around to it here in a sec. The other place he suggests that they go to is the House of Order. Now, the House of Order is the temple to Astramari, the really strict one. Oh, no, sorry. The House of Order is the temple to Valanav. So it's the super strict temple to Valanav, and it's also the place in the city that keeps all the birth and death certificates. So they're the ones who keep track of who's born and who dies in the city. And if you visit them, they can tell you, yeah, Wolfren is technically recorded as having died in the city, but he wasn't born here. They don't know where he was born. The legend was that he came, or the rumor, the story was, that he studied in Varnathis and then showed up. That's where he got his training. And then he came to Wyrmbone to set up shop, but he wasn't from Wyrmbone. However, if they know that he has a brother because they went to the Skygaze Inn and they managed to track down the servant, they can learn that his brother picked up the stuff. And if you ask the people at the House of Order about the brother, they're like, yeah, we have records about him visiting the town. He sometimes visited this temple. However, he wasn't born here and he didn't die here. So he didn't live here either. So now they've got a bit of a mystery. They've got a brother who came to town 295 years ago, picked up a box of stuff and left. And that box of stuff may have the signet ring. But that's the puzzle. That's the thing they need to solve. What I'm still trying to puzzle out exactly is how they make the leap from one to the other. Because here's where the clue is. The Teetering Tower has a book written by the brother. But there's no way for them to know that he would write a book. So, there's that. And, I'm trying to figure out who might know that the brother wrote a book. And there's a bunch of different ways they might find this out. Now, they might go back. Maybe the answer is to go back to Hadram and ask him about the brother. Because they have no reason to ask about the brother necessarily early on. So, if they ask about the brother, maybe Hadram knows. The real answer here is that the Teetering Tower has a copy of the book. And that's really important because the book, inside the book, it's a book about horticulture, because that's what Wolfren's brother was into. He's a horticulturist. And, into research and into study like his brother, but instead of being into magic, he's into plants. But the entire book is written about the plants and wildlife around his home of Red Thistle. And that is the end of part 2, is when they figure out that the trail leads them to Red Thistle. So those are the main plot beats, right? I think there's a few things in there I still need to work out, like how they learn that Wolfren's brother wrote a book, how they know to go to the Teetering Tower to find the book. There's a few leaps in there that I still need to kind of iron out. But I think the path is there. Now, there's also another aspect of this, is what do I add to this to prevent it from being, frankly, just kind of a bone-dry exploration and talking for 4 sessions, right? Because I don't want that. So what I do want, however, is adventure added into this. So I've got some thoughts on this. I'll kind of walk you through some of them. So the first piece is when they go to the Skygaze Inn, they need to talk to the servant who was alive then and knew Wolfren. It's another elf. And she is the one who knows that Wolfren left a number of things at the inn when he disappeared and that his brother came and picked it up. Now, maybe she also knows that his brother came and picked it up and, you know, he was fascinated with the plants and gardens around this and said that he was writing a book on horticulture, right? So that's possible. She may be able to clue them in on the fact that the brother wrote a book. That's possible, but it feels like I'm giving away too much information in one spot for that. However, I think the adventure here is going to go visit her because I don't think she lives in town. I think she lives outside town, far enough away that it's a little bit of a journey. Not like we need to pack for an overnight trip, but it's like a hour or 2 hour walk through the wilderness. This, of course, gives me plenty of chances to throw a random encounter at the party, you know, or some sort of dangers. It's also possible that when they get there, she's dealing with another problem, like he is either being harassed by some creatures or something, or has a chore that she desperately needs taken care of. Like, you know, she's out, you know, weeding her fields and dealing with, you know, mischievous creatures that are screwing with her plants or something. There's plenty of opportunities in, like, going out to visit an aging elf. And what I don't want to do, to be clear, I'm not a big fan of being like, oh, look, we went and visited her, and it's good that we showed up when we did because her house is being attacked by trolls. Obviously, trolls are too powerful, but my point is what I don't want to do is set up a situation where if the PCs hadn't decided to show up when they showed up, she would have died. I think that's a little hackneyed. I think what's better is you get there and she is, you know, willing to help, but also complaining about a problem that you can decide to help her with, right? Or is dealing with some sort of nuisance or threat. There's also the chance of, you know, just some random encounters on the way there. But I think this is a great way that when they go and visit the servant, this is their first chance to kind of have a fight, something interesting happen that isn't just go and talk to people and make skill checks. So I don't know how that relates to the House of Order. I think the key thing that they learn at the House of Order is that Wolfren wasn't born in town, which should tell them that he has roots somewhere else. And when they finally ask about the brother, if they do ask about the brother at the House of Order, they learn that the brother never lived in town, never owned property, and only visited infrequently, because they do have records of everyone who visits the House of Order, because you got to sign in and sign out. You know, it's a very regimented kind of place. So what I don't know is what the adventure, what if any, there is any sort of adventure or fun that happens here. I'm still kind of trying to think about that. I'm also trying to think about how this might relate to the fact that he wrote a book. Now, it could be that in the records, because they would definitely have his sign in and sign out records, that they may even keep records of his prayers, right? That sounds like something that would happen at the House of Valanev, that they'd be like, well, this is what he prayed for, right? And it could be, and maybe this is the key, is that they have the record of, you know, that he prayed for the success of his new novel, of his new horticultural manual, right, at one point in time. And that could be interesting, because now they know that there's a book that they can try and find that may help them understand the brother better. So, I mean, that's an interesting clue. It's something they'd have to put together. I'm a little worried about that being obscure enough that they're like, yeah, okay, well, whatever, you know, but I feel like that feels like an important clue. But again, I still don't necessarily have a quest or a mission here. It could be that there's something going on at the House of Valenev that is, worth, dealing with, or becomes an encounter. The the House of Order is also backing this kind of fundamental religious cult that wants to drive everyone back to more proper worship. And it's possible that they could just be involved with this, and that the real challenge here is just dealing with a bunch of religious zealots who are trying to get everyone to pray more and harder and, live by godly standards, and most people don't pay any attention. So that's possible as the plotline there. So finally we get to the Teetering Tower. And the Teetering Tower, once they get there, or when they come back to it, because, again, they may not go to the Teetering Tower third. They eventually need to go there and find the brother's book. That's the key. But I'm currently thinking that the owner of the Teetering Tower has been having a real problem lately because the order system, which has always been chaotic in the place, right? So the Teetering Tower looks like you took a number of stories of a building and put them on top of each other, but they're each different buildings with different shapes, and the whole thing looks uneven. And inside it is equally kind of chaotic. And once they're inside, the shop owner can explain that he doesn't know what's going on, but all of his books are misplaced, and he doesn't know where anything is right now, and it's a real problem. I think the story here is that he has a Gloamling who is helping him, right? So if you read the backstory for Gloamling, they have this thing where they will quietly help people. And they think they're doing good, and, they're oftentimes, they're the type who shows up at night and finishes all the cobbler's shoes for them because they like them and they want them to be their friend. But they're too shy to talk to them, right? Because they're Gloamlings, right? That's what they do. And what's going on in the Teetering Tower is that there is a Gloamling who sneaks in at night to reorganize the books. So everything's in a weird system. So to find the book that they need, they either have to do a ridiculously brute force effort to try and find this book. But that's not going to work because every night the books keep moving around. Or they have to work with the shop owner who's willing to allow them to try and get to the bottom of this. And once they find and capture the Gloamling has a system, and has a great system, and was trying to enact this system, but the Gloamling can find the book they're looking for. That's the key, right? So, the Gloamling knows what the organization is. To everyone else, it seems chaotic, right? It's kind of like if you walked into a library and didn't understand the Dewey Decimal System. It's just like, why is everything all over the place? It doesn't make any sense. Things are grouped together, but without some sort of organizing structure, it's kind of all over the place. So, there's that. Now, so I've got red herrings. I've got a plot through line. I feel like using the House of Order to tie the book into it is probably the right call. So the clues they need to get in order is go to the Remembering Stone, learn that Wolfren used to visit the Skygaze Inn. Until they do those things, talking to any of the other people seems like a non-starter. It doesn't go anywhere. So go to the Skygaze Inn, learn that there was a server there, go to the server's place, deal with monsters, deal with other stuff. Talk to the servant, the retired server. The server says, he's got a brother. Brother came and picked up a box of stuff. Okay, well, what next? Next, doesn't matter where you go. If you go to the Teetering Tower, the owner does not remember that Wolfren's brother wrote a book. Does not know. So you have to go to the House of Order. There, they might let you look through the records of the prayers and stuff. It occurs to me that this is a perfect spot for the House of Order to require the PCs, now that I'm thinking about it. The House of Order would not let them easily access those records and prayers. That seems like a violation. Unless, of course, they proved their devotion to Valinav and did some task of some sort. So this is a perfect place to add some sort of task. So that is definitely what's going to happen there, is that once they do finally go to the House of Order, the House of Order requires them to do some sort of irritating, ridiculous task involving order and law and stricture, and that allows them to get access to the records. This is when they learn that Wolfren is not from the town, neither is Wolfren's brother, and that Wolfren's brother doesn't live here. And that in Wolfren's in the brother's notes on his prayers, he prayed for a successful launch for his new book on horticulture. And that brings us back to the Teetering Tower, where they go to try and find the book, because they know the Teetering Tower doesn't have the ring, but they can go and find the book. And that then leads to them dealing with the Gloamling, who is rearranging the books, and that then allows them to find out that the brother lived in Red Thistle. And that's what leads to part 3. Now, all right, so I like that. All right, now that I've talked it out, I've solved out a few things. I think I might want to add another red herring or two, because the Remembering Stone just became not a red herring, because it's now the first key. But it's a minor key. It's not really, you don't really learn anything useful. You just learn another place to go. So it's like a stepping stone. So there's one other part that I want to introduce in this that's kind of a parallel story that doesn't have anything to do with the search for the ring, but it does have to do with the fact that they've entered the tower. So for those of you who have read and been a part of this up to this point in time, you know that in part 1 there's a bit of a extra story being told. At the very beginning of part 1, when the players sign up to enter the tower, there's a space for groups, and then there's a space for individual heroes who are then grouped together as one party to enter the tower. And the PCs are all in that group, but they're not alone. There's one NPC who signs up as well, but that NPC never shows up the next day to actually enter the tower. And in fact, when they come out of the tower later, they learn that that NPC is dead. And that NPC is Greyfawn Nimblebrow. Now, Greyfawn Nimblebrow is a halfling, super excited, ready to adventure, is dead. So Greyfawn's killers are targeting everyone who went into the tower, because they don't want anyone to learn any of the things that are in there, and they just want to remain quiet and forgotten. And Greyfawn was the first one they killed, and they were hoping to get more, but they're opportunistic killers, and they're not going to attack people in large groups, but they will get more and more bold as this adventure goes on. So, as a parallel story in this, while they're going to explore these places and stuff, these folks, we'll call them, are starting to track them down. And this introduces a brand new thing that I haven't talked about at all, because I wasn't ready. But I'm working on these folks, and there is already a mention of them in the second half of part 1. So when the PCs enter the dark laboratory, they see a number in the very first room. They see a number of displays. Old books, a cutting from a tree, a letter written by Arvanis, the scholar who was researching the Seven Truths. And around the base of that pedestal where the letter was, there are weird bones. And I say weird because they're like stretched, and they look kind of human, but they're definitely kind of not. They're too long, like, for their width and size. It'd be like as if you took the femur of a normal human and just took it without increasing the mass and just stretched it so that it was a good 30% longer, but was thinner and fragile. and the skull is kind of an odd shape and kind of angular. So this is introducing a brand new creature that exists in Eventide called Gaunts. So Gaunts are creepy humanoids that like to live in the shadows and darkness, and they're not interested. Yeah, they are. There is a bit of inspiration from Slender Man here, but it's not. It's a little Slender Man. It's a little dark stalker, dark creeper, those sort of creatures. But I don't actually want to use those because they don't fit my narrative quite the way I want them to, not without rewriting them. So I'm kind of taking part of their lore and part of like weird kind of Slender Man lore and blending them together into Gaunts. And they come in different types. There are different types of Gaunts, but no, and not Lovecraftian either. These are not like night Gaunts or anything like that. No, they're definitely humanoids, and they're not like, you know, inconceivable otherworldly. They're just, their skin is bone white. You know, they have eyes that are pools of darkness. They're very narrow and stretched. They really dislike light. And they, you know, stalk in shadows and are assassins. You know, and many of the more powerful ones wield shadow magic, and you know, they dress in very form-fitting, very, very thin, narrow, but ratty and old clothing. So it's like they're wearing tailored old clothing that was actually made for something whose body is very strangely proportioned, but it also looks like all of it was made 200 years ago, and it's all moth-eaten and ratty. They basically stalk in the shadows and murder people. They killed Greyfawn Nimblebrow. And they are coming for the player characters. So in part 2, there is a side story that is happening in parallel. That is these Gaunts coming for the player characters, and the player characters can actually take the fight to them and go down into the sewers and deal with this nest of Gaunts, and come to realize that it's only the tip of the iceberg, that there are a lot of these things. So Gaunts living beneath the streets of Wyrmbone. Yeah, they are mortal. They're not undead. Is a subplot that I haven't really talked about yet. I didn't even include in some of the original descriptions because I was still formulating what kind of form they would take and how they would be included. So, yeah, there we go. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think we're at about, we got about 10 minutes left here in the stream. I think I'll open it up to some questions if folks have any. There were some questions from before. See if I can actually scroll back up to those. Those are. Oh no, you don't want to let roll at all, do you? Oh, there we are. How obvious is it that the signet ring is needed or hinted at, highly probable, or written down and told direct? So, the question about the signet ring. So at the end of part 1, a couple things happen. Once they're done dealing with the Shadow Hunter, the kind of cat-like creature that, by the way, was placed there by Gaunts. The Gaunts are the ones who broke into Wolfren's laboratory forever ago. And that will become apparent because when the players in part 2, when the players get access to the Gaunts hideout, they find some of Wolfren's old books in their hideout. So they're the ones who broke into the library, and they're the ones who left the rune that summoned the Shadow Hunter. So, mystery solved. Kind of, except for why the hell were they doing that and what were they up to? Oh, yeah. So after dealing with the hunter, or at least scaring it off, because they will have to deal with it later. It's a level 3 creature right now, so it's probably a little too tough for them to kill, and it flees the moment they hurt it. Or gang up on it. So once they're done with that, they have 2 rooms that they can explore. One is a reagent storage room that is basically just filled with treasure. And the other is Wolfren's study, which contains his notes and thoughts and all that kind of stuff. Most importantly, there is a diary there that mostly just chronicles experiments and stuff, but the last page of it describes what happened to Wolfren when the dragon attacked. Because he was down in the laboratory when it happened. And so there's going to be a handout at the end of part 1 that is the last page of Wolfren's diary. And that description says, you know, I am trapped down here. There's only so long that I can subsist off what meager supplies I have. My best option is to go, you know, and hope that my magic can sustain me. I shall retire to the vault. There I shall be kept safe, you know, and when they finally approach the vault door, I've been using magic mouths throughout this. The vault door may tell them that they need the signet ring. So I suppose that's kind of all that they need to know. So what were the Gaunts doing in Wolfren's tower? I'm not sure that's going to become readily apparent to anyone just yet. They clearly went in there to take stuff. And they're clearly interested in making sure that no one goes in there. So they have some sort of malignant interest in what Wolfren was all about. And Wolfren was clearly interested in Eventide, so there may be some sort of link there. Or they could be a cult, right? There are cults in the world that are using some sinister ancient knowledge and bits of old gods and things like that are now gone, right? If you've checked out the kind of the information on secret societies and organizations that's up on MinotaurGames.com, you will see that there's a discussion of some old cults, right? There are old cults that worship gods that are now gone, that don't speak to anyone anymore. And one of them is in Wyrmbone. And a very small cell, but they are dedicated to investigating more about their creepy ancient serpent deity. You know, like you do. So yeah, as for the Gaunts and how they work into part 2, I think there's probably going to be a nighttime encounter that happens pretty early on where the Gaunts come after the player characters, and then possibly leave some sort of clue. I'm still working this out. This is probably the loosest part of part 2 right now. But we get an initial attack where the Gaunts come after the player characters and give some sort of clue or lead some sort of bread trail that allows the players to at least get an idea of where the Gaunts are coming from. But the trail grows cold. And then later on in the adventure, they make another attack. And I think what I'll probably do is some sort of triangulation game where the Gaunts, once I have the map, basically the Gaunts are all attacking from one area, but you can't really tell what area they're coming from until you've fought them a few times. And then once you figure it out, you can track them down to where they're from. But I'm not 100% sure how that's going to work just yet. I think I need to figure that out still. In that there needs to be a way to kind of narrow down where to search for them, and I don't want them to find it right away. As a matter of fact, I think going to deal with the Gaunts is kind of part of the crescendo of part 2. Is that going into their... Because that's the one other thing that this part is missing is how do I wrap up part 2 in a way that feels satisfactory? So there was a question of, do they go after the other parties as well? And I think that ties into it, is that I think, Grablin's lot is the one that they really mess up. And maybe they even capture Grablin's lot, and that is the catalyst towards the end that allows the players to go and rescue the newbie adventurers, and deal with these Gaunts once and for all. All right, sorry, once and for all is a bit of a misspeak. Not once and for all, but this group, for now. Yeah, so are the Gaunts a known enemy in the world that the PCs can roll knowledge, or are they a total unknown? They are a total unknown. You can technically still roll on them, but their rarity is such right now that at this stage of the world, they are rare. They are so rare that the DC is quite high to know anything about them. They're, you know, they're rare creatures at this point in time. So, as a result, the DC is quite high. I got a question here that's a different question that's just about, is the planar image available anywhere besides the video? Not yet. It will go up on the website as soon as I write the information on the planar stuff down. I have that stuff written somewhere, but I need to edit it and make some changes to it. It's just about finding time. Once it's ready, it'll go up, though, for folks to be able to use. I got to make sure I got everything on it and that it's all set, but I'm pretty close on it. I think I even got it. I'm assuming you're talking about this image. That guy right there. Yeah. So, I will make that available in high res, because I got it in high res. So, any field trips planned for the fields? Seems like an area where things could be learned about maybe globalings or even gaunts, maybe as a side quest to the Teetering Tower. That's interesting. The Teetering Tower, it may be that the gloamling isn't staying in I think it's in Black Arches where the Teetering Tower is. So it might be the sort of thing where the gloamling gets caught, but then flees back to the fields, and then they have to chase the fields, chase it down in the fields and find it there. That's a possibility. It might also just be a good red herring that they get sent to the fields, right, for some reason. Or the House of Order could force them to go to the fields and hand out flyers, or, you know, do something for Valanav, you know, deliver, you know, alms, you know, for the poor or something like that, right? You know, make the players go and do good. Wouldn't be a terrible idea. So, you know, there's a bunch of different ways. I do want the players to visit the fields. There is also quite possibly another red herring in here that I might want to throw in, that they try, that maybe one of the things that they could do is try and contact folks in the black market to see if any of them have old things of Wolfrens floating around in the black market, or the gray market. And that might lead them to, there is a secret tavern that isn't in the player's guide, because the players shouldn't know about it at the start of play. That's a place where they do gambling and stuff like that, and it's the place where you can buy poisons and all that kind of stuff. So, but that's out in the fields. Yeah, you know, they could be asked to escort the High Priest of Valanav on his daily routine, where he goes down to the soup kitchen and gives out alms and tries to convert people, right? And they just have to go and assist him. That's a possibility. That's a way to go. That might give them another avenue of exploration and kind of another way to experience other parts of town, right? It's worth thinking about. That's for sure. Because I certainly have reasons enough to send them up into the Gemtree district. And there's plenty of stuff in Black Arch, but I should add stuff to the tumbles so that's a good point. And it'd be easy enough to bring them to the tumbles if I put the nest of gaunts is under the tumbles, right? That'd be an easy enough way to do it. And it could be that, you know, their first thing is an ambush where they get a message sent to them that if they're interested in some of Wolfren's old things, they should meet a contact late at night in some alley or something, and then it's just an ambush. You know, things like that I think are doable. I'll have to check the pacing and make sure that makes logic sense. But, you know, that's something we can work. All right. Well, folks, I think that about wraps it up here for today. That gets me through all my notes for part 2 as it currently stands. Obviously, I have a lot of writing to do to make all this happen. But I'm starting to feel pretty good about the direction and the overall shape it's going to take. I think it's going to be a fun adventure. I just need to make sure I add enough adventure. Because part 3 is a journey, and then at the end of that journey, there is an adventure in Red Thistle, helping the family of the brother's descendants, and that's how you get your hands on the ring. And then the final part is returning to Wyrmbone and going down below, dealing with the Shadow Hunter once and for all, and finally getting into Wolfren's vault. So Tiger Eyes, I see that. I'll take a peek at that. And thank you for the idea, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here now because I have to get ready for my other stream. So I want to thank you all for watching. Those are some great ideas. I'm gonna grab those here before we end. Throw them in my notes to take a peek at. I appreciate that. Folks, I want to thank you all for hanging out here this week. This has been a good stream. You know, Saturday's stream was great too if you have access to it. Saturday's stream was really good. I thought the discussion about magic was really good. I thought this one was really good too. So we're rolling along strong here, folks. I want to thank you all for watching. Take care. Have yourself a good rest of your week. We'll be back here next week. There's no Saturday stream this week, so the next stream, talking about Eventide, will be this time next week, where I'll be talking about how both groups wrapped up part 1, because both groups have a session, one this Thursday, the one next Monday. So we are almost done with part 1. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.